But my background actually is writing about energy and giving talks actually for the last 5 or 6 years on energy policy, really in the context of climate change, trying to get people to understand the crises that we face. And within that, of course, although my background was writing about energy and the sort of economics of energy, I really had to learn about land use. And that's how I got into all of this, because about 25% of our greenhouse gases, of course, come from our land use. And that's everything from deforestation, from our agrochemicals, from the way we turn over soil and lose soil carbon, and many other aspects of that. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on all that, but I'm going to try and cover a lot this evening. And I'm sure most of you are very aware about climate change, but I'm just going to give you a bit of a health warning that this, and I do find many audiences or some people in audiences still haven't quite got their heads around all the facts. And some of it is quite scary if you haven't actually looked at the figures before and you haven't kind of quite understood the urgency of all this. So these figures, I'll just flag this up first. This is from the IPCC 1.5 report, which came out in 2018. And the bit to take away here, if you've forgotten that particular report, is that dark grey line across the screen. I don't know if you can see my cursor. That's where we were in 2018, with about a 1 degree on average, of global warming. And the scary bit is that this is, of course, where our scientists expect us to be by 2030. And you can see that we are into quite high levels of threat across the globe in different areas. And that is, of course, what the scientists are telling us we absolutely have to avoid, and we must not go above that line. Even that line is too far. We're already into an unstable climate. That's a blend of the political necessities, the realities of our world economy, and what we want to do. But we really must aim to stay below that line. And these are what we've got left of our carbon budget, as it's called. So if we're going to stay below that 1.5 degrees, we have so much carbon that the scientists calculate we can put out before we hit that line. And the trouble is, this is the dark black line there, you can see. Had we got going on cutting our greenhouse emissions a lot earlier, we would have had a much easier ride of it. Because we've left it so late, we are facing an absolutely precipitous drop. What we need to be doing now in the global north, in our country, you and me, we should be cutting by about 10 to 15% our greenhouse gases every year. So cumulatively, one on top of every year, really aiming, every one of us should be aiming to be fossil fuel free by 2030 at the latest. And when you think about the different areas of our consumption, our heating, our lighting, our power, our heating, our power, our transport, and our consumption of goods, and then all our land use consumption as well. That's one heck of a challenge, but it's one heck of a challenge because we've left this so late. And that's the sort of background story to all of this. So that's where we are. In fact, when we say 8 years of budget, actually that's probably down to 7 years now. Of course, so 2020 was the last absolutely last possible year for us to peak our emissions. And of course, because of COVID, we did it. Without COVID, we wouldn't have done it. But our emissions came down about 7% last year, only 7%. That means we still put out 93% of what we put out in previous years. So, but we have now peaked, and there are many good stories about industry and farming practice and other things changing. But the bottom line is that we all have to understand here is that it's our fossil fuels which are the major part, really, from that dark green line down. That's the major part of our greenhouse gases. Above that is land use. So land use is a really significant part. The reason why we focus on land use in particular and trees is because it's part of our hope. So not only can we hope quite speedily and with multiple other benefits to cut that amount of greenhouse gases that we're putting out every year, but also to sequester back, to actually lock up, take some of that carbon dioxide back out of the air and lock it up into our soil and our forestry. This is perhaps, without going on too much about the bad news about greenhouse gases and our climate change threat, this is what we face at the moment. And I just think there aren't enough people who quite understand this. At the moment, we are heading at the end of the century between 3.2 and 6 degrees. Now that is out of control. That is a human and a physical geography that none of us will recognise. It's the end of the civilization that we know, and that is by the end of this century. So this report here from Frontiers in Conservation Scientists was just from a couple of weeks ago. You know, the scale of the threats to the biosphere and all its life forms, including humanity, is so great that it's difficult to grasp for even well-informed experts. So this is where we are. And, you know, we can go on day to day and pretend it's not happening, but it is. And of course, this is where last year took us. We are now up to 1.2 degrees of rising of climate change. And clearly that's not equal across the globe, as you can see from that figure on the left. It's much more concentrated around the Arctic, which of course got to Siberia was at 38 degrees last summer. You know, mass melting, mass loss of methane, and so on. So we are in a rapidly changing world now. And of course, these are just some of the disasters that we saw last year. And as Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, said in his Read lectures this year, we are now into biblical scale disasters. And they have, that level of disaster has tripled since the 1980s. The extreme weather events have tripled. So, okay, so where do trees come into this? The point is, okay, we have to cut our fossil fuels. That's primary thing number one. That's what we all have to do. But we can ease out that carbon budget, that figure I showed you at the beginning, which says that we have to, you know, that we really have only till 2030. By the more we can sequester back carbon dioxide, the longer time we give ourselves to change our economies and cut those fossil fuels. So our government, along with most other governments, has got very high tree planting plans. Our government has said 30,000 hectares a year. Unfortunately, as you can see from this chart, that we're not making that at the moment. We're nowhere near that. And so we need to really step that up. The beauty, of course, of woodland is that it's not just that as that biomass grows, it takes carbon dioxide out of the air. It's also woodland protects the carbon in the soil below it. You can't plough that soil underneath a woodland or a forest. And so that soil is protected, and it grows every year as the leaves fall and the microbes turn it back into soil carbon. That soil carbon builds up and it can't be touched. So it's a fantastic reservoir of stored carbon for us. And of course, the tragedy is, as with most of these things, that the UK is way behind most other European countries in terms of forest coverage. We are only at about 13%. And as you can see, and I guess we all know from our own experience, most of that is in Scotland. So we are an extremely deforested country. And part of that, of course, is because we've lost our top predators. Europe hasn't. They've still got wolves and bears and so on, which keep their deer and squirrels and everything else under control. We don't have. And so we have a real big problem with browsing, just cutting down our new growth. But that's only one of the issues. One, you know, of course, others are to do with the way we do our agriculture and so on. We have some other particular problems in the UK with our woodland, and one of them is to do with the age structure of our woodlands. We had a mass planting of woodlands sort of up to about the 1980s, fueled by lots of tax breaks and so on, and then we stopped. And so, in fact, we of course we've got going again in the last few years, but literally the last 2 or 3 years. But the age structure of our woodland it's not continuous, and it means that actually, according to the Forestry Commission, the carbon in our woodland we peaked in about 2019, and we're actually losing forestry carbon at the moment. Yeah. I think the other, I'm not expecting you to read these bits in detail, but again, it talks about the fact that there's 3 to 4 times as much carbon in that soil below the woodland than there is actually in the woodland here. But I like this figure. I nicked it off the internet. You see this woman here. She's standing next to a sort of 12-meter sycamore, and that effectively represents 1 ton of carbon. And because of the molecular weight of carbon dioxide, that's about 3.67 tons of carbon dioxide has gone into growing that tree. But obviously that will have taken many decades. But as I say, it's the soil below it also that tree protects that's also incredibly valuable. 2 degrees of rising of climate change. And clearly that's not equal across the globe, as you can see from that figure on the left. It's much more concentrated around the Arctic, which of course got to Siberia was at 38 degrees last summer, you know, mass melting, mass loss of methane and so on. So we are in a rapidly changing world now. And of course, these are just some of the disasters that we saw last year. And as Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, said in his Wreath lectures this year, we are now into biblical scale disasters. And they have, that level of disaster has tripled since the 1980s. The extreme weather events have tripled. So, okay, so where do trees come into this? The point is, okay, we have to cut our fossil fuels. That's primary thing number one. That's what we all have to do. But we can ease out that carbon budget. That figure I showed you at the beginning, which says that we have to, you know, that we really have only till 2030. By the more we can sequester back carbon dioxide, the longer time we give ourselves to change our economies and cut those fossil fuels. So our government, along with most other governments, has got very high tree planting plans. Our government has said 30,000 hectares a year. Unfortunately, as you can see from this chart, that we're not making that at the moment. We're nowhere near that. And so we need to really step that up. The beauty, of course, of woodland is that it's not just that as that biomass grows, it takes carbon dioxide out of the air. It's also woodland protects the carbon in the soil below it. You can't plow that soil underneath a woodland or a forest. And so that soil is protected, and it grows every year as the leaves fall and the microbes turn it back into soil carbon. That soil carbon builds up and it can't be touched. So it's a fantastic reservoir of stored carbon for us. And of course, the tragedy is, as with most of these things, that the UK is way behind most other European countries in terms of forest coverage. We are only at about 13%. And as you can see, and I guess we all know from our own experience, most of that is in Scotland. So we are an extremely deforested country. And part of that, of course, is because we've lost our top predators. Europe hasn't. They've still got wolves and bears and so on, which keep their deer and squirrels and everything else under control. We don't have. And so we have a real big problem with browsing, just cutting down our new growth. But that's only one of the issues. One, you know, of course, others are to do with the way we do our agriculture and so on. We have some other particular problems in the UK with our woodland, and one of them is to do with the age structure of our woodlands. We had a mass planting of woodlands sort of up to about the 1980s, fueled by lots of tax breaks and so on, and then we stopped. And so, in fact, we of course we've got going again in the last few years, but literally the last 2 or 3 years. But the age structure of our woodland it's not continuous, and it means that actually, according to the Forestry Commission, the carbon in our woodlands, we peaked in about 2019, and we're actually losing forestry carbon at the moment. Yep. I think the other, I'm not expecting you to read these bits in detail, but again, it talks about the fact that there's 3 to 4 times as much carbon in that soil below the woodland than there is actually in the woodland here. But I like this figure. I nicked it off the internet. You see this woman here. She's standing next to a sort of 12-meter sycamore, and that effectively represents 1 ton of carbon. And because of the molecular weight of carbon dioxide, that's about 3.67 tons of carbon dioxide has gone into growing that tree. But obviously that will have taken many decades. But as I say, it's the soil below it also that tree protects that's also incredibly valuable. And of course, sorry, just to pile on the bad news, we can't ignore now. I think we all woke up to it. If we weren't, you probably as supporters of YACWAG were well aware of this before the majority of the population, but it's not just our climate change crisis we're facing, it's our biodiversity crisis. And I've taken these quotes from Benedict MacDonald's Rebirding, which if anybody hasn't read it, I strongly recommend. But as he says, again, the UK is probably the worst country in Europe in terms of facing our species decline. And I think his quote there in the middle is very, it really sums it up. The point is that we lost our top predators in the UK centuries ago, and we've certainly, you know, done that over a long period of time. We've spent the last 50, 60 years removing all our microbes and insects. with our modern agriculture. We're now losing everything in the middle. We're losing our mammals, birds, butterflies, pollinators, and so on. And that is where we are. And it's not, I think, again, that quote at the bottom, I think really shows it up. You know, we can do everything we can in our towns and cities, you know, build ponds, build hedgehog holes and all that sort of thing. And we should do that. But the real problem is our rural deserts. It's the green areas out there that we think of as natural countryside, which are not natural at all and generally are quite dead. And they are not supporting wildlife. So it's really, for you and me, it's actually about changing our food intake and how we source our food, particularly much more organic we need, and so on. So looking specifically why we set up Avon Needs Trees, it was actually this map that, that got me going. I went to some talks by the Environment Agency, and this is the Bristol-Avon Catchment Area, and you can see that you're in it. So it goes beyond the political boundaries of Avon. And all these rivers flow down into Bristol, and you can see how very little woodland we have across our catchment area. We're down to just a few percentage of woodland areas. And that means not only, of course, you know, issues about carbon and about biodiversity loss, but also about we've lost our natural flood management. So, and Bristol, of course, faces a really particular problem there, because what we now face in Bristol is what they call tidal lock. And we had this, we may have had it more recently, but I was certainly aware of it in September 2019, where we had, this is Bristol, very, very low lying, where we had very high incoming tides, because we're on a tidal river, that's the point, met by very high inundations coming from inland. And there was just nowhere for the water to go. So, you know, that's when Bristol starts to flood. And that's what we are, you know, looking at in the future, you know, as an increasing possibility. This picture on the bottom left was actually Bristol in 2016. But yes, so it's that, you know, Bristol is at the bottom of all those rivers. So in fact, it was the Environment Agency who said, I went to them and sort of said, well, look, would it make sense to buy some land and start planting trees? You know, would that help? And they said, well, yes, please do it. And he said the best place to plant, of course, is in the high catchment area. I mean, planting trees anywhere and sequestering carbon and improving our soil, which I know that YACWAG is very much involved in, doing that wherever you can is good. But you know, if you've got to start anywhere, the high catchment area to stop and slow water entering our river systems at all is particularly beneficial, and it benefits all the towns and cities below, with Bristol at the bottom. So Avon Needs Trees. So I went away and I talked to everyone. I talked to, as I say, the Environment Agency, the Woodland Trust, the Bristol-Avon Rivers Trust, various others. And at the same time, this piece of land came up near Chippenham, which is in our high catchment area. And it's called Hazeland. It's 34 acres. And it's a really beautiful site of mixed habitat. And everybody who goes there falls in love with it. It's got 10 acres of ancient woodland, very neglected, riverside meadow, wet woodland, and then 3 areas of low-grade pasture. And the question was, could we raise the money? It was very expensive. We had to have an independent survey done, and we got it down to 325,000. And anyway, we set out to fundraise it for it, and eventually we did, and we got it, and we bought the land in in August last year, finally, slightly slowed down by COVID. And I won't go into all the details, but I'm very happy to answer any questions about it if anybody would like to. And we're now on the cusp of buying our second piece of land. Now, of course, when you look at, let me just go back there, this is our catchment area. There is a reason why we called ourselves Avon Needs Trees. We are ants. You know, we are not going to solve the problems of the world or of our catchment area by buying land and planting, you know, 30, 20 acres each year. But we hope over the years ahead to make an impact and to help and to inspire others to do the same. So that's Hazeland, and just to show you again, absolutely beautiful piece of land. And remember, ancient forest is particularly valuable in this country. It's a very, very tiny percentage, especially now HS2 has taken off a few more chunks. So only about 1.2% of the UK is ancient woodland. So we have our little bit, and it's by the River Marden, lots of wet woodland. As I say, there are lakes, artificial lakes and canal remnants, which are full of water at this time of year, or they are for about 6 months of the year. So it's got otters and badgers, and it's got a lot of red and amber listed birds, marsh tits and swallows and so on. We're only beginning at the moment to survey. These are the fields that we're planting, and we've brought on some fantastic volunteer woodland officers who have these are forestry students, and they've done all our planning for us, working with the Woodland Trust, and this has all been fantastic. So for the last, obviously hampered by COVID enormously, we've on a mission to plant about 10,000 trees this year, and we've got about 7,500 in the ground, which is quite extraordinary, because for most of the last month we've been operating with small groups of just 6 people only, 6 locals, very local to Hazeland, plus 1 trustee. And this guy on the bottom left, we're particularly proud of this. This is Tommaso from Bristol University. We've got one area of the land which we've turned over to university research, in fact, to monitor tree growth and to measure it, and to see whether adding microbials from the soil fungi from the ancient woodland can help accelerate the growth of trees. So it's quite an interesting long-term research project. And we have a lot of as I say, endangered species. We are, as I say, just beginning to survey for these, but we're aware that they're there, and we have a whole biodiversity management plan now to capture these and to monitor our impact on their habitat and foraging. So I'll just tell you a little bit more. So we've got obviously a lot of birds. A lot of fungi we've been distributing. This is our next piece of land, which is Seend near Melksham, and we're hoping to buy the first 3 fields there, and we have the option of the 4th one. So again, a beautiful piece of land, and a lot of local engagement. I think the advantage you have over us, Yakwag, is being quite local and you know, not having to travel far. For us, it takes us about 40 minutes or more to get to the areas of land if we're coming from Bristol. So that's quite a management problem. But yes, we I'm sure, like you, engaged in all sorts of fundraising and so on, and that's a major part of it. We've now raised the money to buy the land at Seend, and we hope to be kicking that off within a couple of weeks. We've got a lovely lady down here in the bottom left who's running around 10 villages dressed as a tree on the 27th of February, which is just wonderful. But I hope that's kind of answered a little bit for you. It was a fairly speedy talk, actually, but a lot of very glum information there for you on the crises that we face and the role that trees have in possibly addressing some of those issues. And I'd really be happy to answer any questions on these. Is that okay?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. Thank you, Nikki. Yeah, please, come out with your questions. I know I've got a lot, but I think
come off sharing.
Yeah, that's right. So, any questions for Nikki?
I stunned you in silence. I can see someone with their hand up there.
Yeah, we can't see. That's the
No, we can't see. So if someone's got their hand up, stop.
Yes. Was that me?
Yes, yes.
When you talked about being carbon free by 2030, and there are lots of things coming on stream with hydrogen and all those sorts of photovoltaics. If one was unable to do the photovoltaic thing because of aspect, going with the electric company, if they went 100% recyclable, is that job done?
You mean renewable, going 100% renewable? Yeah, I would say actually, I mean, I've limited myself to talking about trees this evening. If anybody wants to follow this further, can I just say, I'm actually giving a talk on are we losing the potential for a green recovery on Monday evening, and that's on Eventbrite and it's free. And if anybody wants to come to that, it'll be a much wider look at where a year of COVID has left us in terms of climate change. And there's positives and negatives in there. You know, I mean, there's some hopeful stuff and there's some very damning stuff. And so to answer your question, Kingsley, right, it has got complicated in terms of 100% renewable tariffs. I think it is the first thing you should do. It's the first thing I advise everyone to do, is just sign up for that renewable tariff. But I would say that there are gold standard renewable tariffs and less than gold standard renewable tariffs. And if you'd like, shall I just explain briefly? Okay, there are really good companies like Good Energy, Green Energy UK, a couple of others that actually have direct relationships with the power producers, that with wind farms and solar farms and so on. And they're called purchase power agreements. And they, of course, they basically, at the end of the year, Ofgem ask them to show that for every hour of energy they've sold to their customers, they've bought in directly from renewable energy companies that amount of power. But there are many others like Bulb, I hate to say it, but even Ecotricity to an extent, that are, what they're doing, what's happened in the last couple of years, there are so many companies now producing, for example, offshore wind, which can be incredibly cheap and abundant. And companies like SSE, for example, they're buying the cheapest brown power, as we would call it, at any time of the, you know, to satisfy the needs of their customers on the grid. And they're not interested in whether it's green or not. They just want the cheapest. And quite often it's offshore wind that's the cheapest. The power they buy comes with renewable certificates. And SSE's customers aren't interested in these, and SSE has no interest in them. So they sell them on a secondary market. And up until recently, they've been selling them at incredibly cheap prices, 0.0025 pence per kilowatt hour or something ridiculous. And companies like Bulb have come in and bought those on the secondary market. They still also buy the cheapest brown power, but by buying those certificates on a secondary market, they cover themselves to say that their group power is green. Does that make sense? It's slightly complicated. I would still say, even if you go for Bulb, you know, basically the price of, even on the secondary market, because so many companies are now doing that, even Shell has got in there, and suddenly, you know, with that little bit of accountancy, turned the power company that they were buying to 100% renewable overnight with no change at all, but they were just buying the certificates on the secondary market. So but it is pushing the price up. So basically, by switching your power provider to 100% renewable, whoever you go with, you are making a difference. But if you go for companies like Good Energy or Green Energy UK, you are pushing the market on a bit more. Fantastic. I would say, can I just say, when I say that the first thing I tell people to do with their energy is to look at a green tariff, the other thing, the other side of it, and lots of people say to me, but I can't afford a green tariff, it's a bit more expensive or whatever. Now, you know, I think you will have to look at exactly, you know, when we say we can't afford it, a lot of us can afford it. It's just that we know we can buy it cheaper elsewhere. So I think that's one issue. But I think the other side of it is there's two bits to our electricity bill. One is the tariff we pay, and one is the amount we consume. And so the other side of changing your tariff is actually what I really say, and this is perhaps one of the hardest things to do, is actually sit down with the people in your household, get out your energy bills and look at them, because most of us are completely divorced from what we're consuming. We just don't know. We're paying on a 3-month direct debit. We don't know what's consuming in our world. We don't know, actually, you know, it's all levelized out for us. We just pay it like it's a tax. And so, you know, what I would say is look at your bills, work out how much you're consuming, and then talk to each other. You know, do you really need all those lights on? Do you really need to be heating those rooms that you're not using? You know, do you need the heating at that level? You know, it's those sort of things. Those things make a difference. So, you know, I'm just trying to offer helpful suggestions, but there's a lot we can do. You know, in the end, one of the things I'll be saying at the talk on Monday, one of the things that isn't happening
positives are that investment is moving, companies, you know, the financial sector is moving, companies are being pushed more or less towards greener agendas. And some of them are more slippery than others and trying to do it with accountancy and so on, but they're all being pushed and harried to be more green. Governments are, you know, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but they're moving. What isn't moving to an extent is us. Behavioural change down on the ground, and I mean across the globe, but particularly for us in the global north, we have not understood that we need to change our consumption. Now, I'm not talking as individuals, many of you will understand that, and you know, so on, but as a nation and as a population in the global north, we haven't understood that our consumption has to change. There is no way we stay below 1.5 degrees by just changing the technology. That is what the scientists are telling us. You know, we can build as many solar panels and wind farms as we like. If we still consume at the level we are, we will crash through 1.5 easily, fast.
Thank you very much for that.
Thanks. Bob had a question, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki. Just getting back to the trees for a moment.
Yes, thank you.
You must be muted.
This was partly prompted by, you know, HS2 destroying ancient woodlands, but planting elsewhere, Bristol Airport doing same sort of thing. And of course, we are sort of engaged in tree planting, you know, in a smaller scale. Have we got, you know, amongst all your wonderful graphs, graphs which show how long planting trees now, how long, at what rate will they start absorbing carbon dioxide, compared, you know, perhaps with the loss of absorption when you cut trees down? What is the time lag between the loss and the gain by planting?
Absolutely understood. So I don't have that graph, but I can tell you who does, which is Bristol Tree Forum. They've done a lot of work on this, and their calculation is it will take 40 years. You take one tree down, it'll take 40 years of another tree's growth to sequester back the carbon from that one tree loss.
Yes, that's more pessimistic than I thought, because on the basis of the trees we planted at the Kongsbury Millennium Green, I thought it might be 25, but 40 sounds worse.
Yes, I'm not sure whether they are including in that, of course, the soil carbon below the trees, you know, which will also be sequestering carbon. And of course, it would depend on the type of tree, how fast the tree grows, you know, the conditions and all sorts of different things. But yes, it's, you know, I mean, we as Avon Needs Trees, I'm sure Yakwag are approached the same. You know, we are often approached by companies now saying, we want to offset with you. And it's really difficult because, you know, it's very difficult to turn down huge wadges of money, you know, when you're trying to raise huge wadges of money to buy land and plant trees. But the truth, what we say, particularly to big companies, we've luckily not been approached by Bristol Airport, and we would refuse to take that money, but we've certainly been approached by Bristol Port and others, and our line on it is that we will only take money from big companies where they can show us their carbon, their 2030 plan. We need to see that they are doing something about their own fossil fuel emissions before we would take their offsetting money, and then we'll discuss it. So that's the line that we've taken. But yes, the trouble is at the moment with the enthusiasm for trees, more and more governments and companies are just seeing this as a way of continuing business as usual. And that's not going to work. Trees are powerful, but they're not that powerful. We can't carry on burning and consuming in the way that we're doing and just think that trees are going to get us out of this. They're not at all. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, that leads me straight to the question I was going to ask, actually, which you've answered most of it, was did you give much consideration on the size of the trees you were going to plant? The type of tree, obviously, and how quick they grow. Is it beneficial to plant bigger trees to start off with, which will then, you know, grow quicker or get to maturity quicker? Or does the cost of it come into it a lot? how big of trees you plant.
Yeah, and so we've planted mainly small whips, and those were donated by the Woodland Trust. We've planted also 50, or we're about to plant 50 orchard trees, which are bigger and more, more robust. But there are many. There were a variety of considerations in there. First of all, I mean, we're planting about 10,000, and yes, so these came free from the Woodland Trust. So it was very hard to say no. They all came passported and of good English stock, and they're broad leaf native plants. So it was very hard. We weren't probably going to turn those down, especially on the first piece of land. And they offered to do so much of the planning for us and the support work for us as well. So we certainly took those. In terms of should we next time plant slightly bigger trees? Well, it's an interesting thing at Seend. I suppose we might. The point is that, of course, more robust trees are going to need more watering and mulching in the first year, more protection in that sense. There's more to lose, and their needs are going to be greater. When you're dealing with a site, I mean, again, at Yakwag, you're all dealing very locally, and I guess you can get out there with the watering cans if you need to. But, for us at a site like Hazeland, which is, has got no running water on site, and so on, we're going to have to raid the canal ponds to water if we go into an early spring drought like we did last year. So again, small whips made sense for us there. I think Graham, shall I don't know if you can see them, Tony.
Nikki,
Yeah.
in terms of trees, obviously where the variety you plant can be dependent on the habitat you're going to put it in. So you're not going to put willows in a dry area. You're going to put them where there's substantial water in the levels. Yeah. But in terms of if you've got choices, is there almost a list of trees, super trees, that the ones that are going to do better than others for the environment or not?
It's again an interesting question. I'm not going to pretend to be the expert here. I do most of the sort of fundraising and all the rest of it. I've relied very heavily on the Woodland Trust and others to advise us on this. So I'm not going to give you the absolutely authoritative answer. My understanding is that there is a bit of tension between the Forestry Commission and the Woodland Trust approach. The Woodland Trust are still heavily promoting native broadleaf trees, which is what we have planted. The Forestry Commission is going more down the line now that we should start to think about planting Mediterranean trees because of climate change, because we are going to lose so many of we haven't got enough time for so many of our native broadleafs to adapt fast. So that is one issue. In terms of super trees, well, it depends on what you're looking for. I mean, obviously up in Scotland, my understanding is that what's happening is that we're planting masses of spruce, fast growing trees that are then cut down for timber, and we're sort of claiming that as our fantastic forestry. But of course, the main thing is not to plant a monocrop of trees, and trees like that will turn the soil very acidic. So so I guess we've just gone with a sort of standard range of native broadleafs, and yes, we've done soil testing and so on to work out which goes where. Our alder go where it's wet and so on, but otherwise it's just that general mix of native broadleafs. I couldn't tell you if any of them are real super trees. In terms of biodiversity, obviously we're planting a lot of scrub as well, sort of hawthorn, blackthorn, that kind of thing, dog rose and so on. So we put that in as a mix, and we've also we're actually rewilding quite a large part of the area, just letting that scrub up, because we know that dynamic scrub is so important. Also, it's not just trees. So
okay, yeah, thank you.
Okay. I think Richard has a question.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because your presentation at the beginning, it had some quite shocking figures, maybe even worse than I expected. But I'm wondering, what's your ambition? How far do you want to go? Have you got a target area or a target number of trees where you could think we've really made a difference now? Because obviously one tree makes a difference, but not much. So where do you need to get to? What's your organisation's ambition?
Oh, well, it's kind of I mean, as I say, we are less than 2 years old. It was literally in April 2019 that we signed the papers. We didn't register as a charity till July 2019. So we're about 18 months old, really, as a charity. We set out as a band of hopefuls, just working out, can we do this? And then we've had to run, as I'm sure you have, to put together all the policies and the framework and the management and so on. We're just about to start, we've fundraised, we've got the money to start employing a director, because we now need that. And we have a project coordinator to do all the public engagement at Hazeland and so on, because that's part of the lottery funding thing. So we are, you know, we're sort of growing as an organisation, but obviously very mindful that we want to keep growing in our ambition as well. We don't have an ultimate thing. I guess what we have talked about is really a chunk of land every year. And I've talked about it, and other trustees have too, is certainly this being a 20-year project minimum. You know, I think it is just a case of keep going, keep biting off bits and see where we get to, but we're always going to be ants. I think the major thing is that the way we amplify our work is through the university research and by getting other people to come on the site and understand. It's using it as an educational tool, and using even talks like this to come and talk to people like you know, and other people who are less aware of these issues. So that's how we could kind of amplify the effect of the small practical bits of work that we're doing. Okay, I think Claire had a question.
Hi, thanks, Nikki. So I think it's really important that we focus on rewilding our little area and keeping it local. But I just wondered, do you have a view about the benefits of one tree in North Somerset versus one tree in other areas of the world? So, for example, I use Tree App, and you watch a video each day and it plants a tree for you, and you can pick different countries around the world. And those apps always sort of seem to go to places like Madagascar and Africa and Asia and South America. I'm just wondering whether trees, like rewilding projects and tree planting near the equator, sequesters proportionately more carbon because the trees grow quicker or whatever, compared to northern latitudes. So
well, I suppose following on from an earlier question, the first thing that we should be doing is protecting existing forest. So actually, you know, in a sense, what we should all be doing is giving money to what's the charity that David Attenborough is a patron of, that buys land in Belize and Guatemala and whatever. I've sorry, temporarily forgotten the name. But you know, to protect. Sorry, what's it called?
World Land Trust.
World Land, is it World Land Trust? Yes, okay. So, you know, in a sense, that should be our, you know, if we're truly thinking about this, protecting existing trees should be our first priority. Then when it comes to reforesting or afforestation, I can't give you the definitive answer on that. I know I've heard, for example, I know what people like, and the enthusiasm for our project, and probably for Yakwag too, is that, and I quite understandably, and I completely get it, people want to be able to see it, and they like the local nature of it. And actually, just as an aside from that, what has been one of the most heartening bits of the project, and I'm sure Yakwag has found the same, is you can see the enormous benefit people get of going on the land, the mental and physical health benefits. You know, we are all slightly starved of this, I think, and not enough access to it. I couldn't believe it, how people were just queuing up to scythe grass for us and to plant trees and do heavy manual work for us, you know, which was just fantastic. But people just love getting on the land. And so I think that's a really, I just wish it isn't. I hope it's just not an either or. That's the point, I guess. I think we need that local trees, as you can see from our catchment map. We really need it in our catchment. So doing some stuff locally is really, really valuable. But and of course, there's a lot of skepticism about offsetting projects abroad, and they have in the past had a bad track record. When offsetting first got going, it was quite clear that a lot of projects were not strongly managed. But I mean, I was very heartened. I heard, and you can still find it on the website, I'm sure, on Costing the Earth, Radio 4 Costing the Earth on carbon offsetting projects last year. And they actually found several that were really positive and really, and I know Madagascar came up in that as well, that it really was making a difference. So although we might be skeptical about it, about whether, you know, it's really happening when we pay that bit of money for an offset in Madagascar or somewhere, it seems that some of these projects are working quite well and making a difference. So can't give you an absolute answer on that. I think it's do everything. So I think there's, I know Kingsley's had his hand up again for a while, and then shall I come to you, Steve? Yeah. Kingsley, did you want to just come back?
Yes, if I may, please. Just following on from that last question and the one before, a question that has often sort of I've pondered, and I'm a professional gardener, or was a professional gardener, right. And so I worked with trees and gardens and things. And the thing that I guess we overlook maybe when we talk about trees taking up carbon, they only do that when they're photosynthesizing, say from April maybe to August, September, when the sap is dying down and then they're going into hibernation. So do you have a view on that? Because that last particular question about planting in the tropics, where they are evergreens by and large, in terms of efficiency, they would be the place to plant.
Yeah, I just don't think we should cut ourselves up too much on which is the best. You know, everything is needed. I mean, you're absolutely right. If you look at the Keeling curve, I don't know if anyone knows that, but that is the measure of our carbon dioxide in parts per million in the atmosphere, and the graph goes zigzag, zigzag, zigzag all the way up. And the reason why it zigzags is that spring inhalation of when all our northern hemisphere trees and growth starts, and it brings down noticeably the carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And then with the fall, it goes up again as the leaves are dropped and the carbon dioxide goes up again. So you're absolutely right. And of course, the worrying thing is the general trend is upwards, and we're putting on about 2 to 3 parts per million of carbon dioxide every year now. And yeah, I won't go into it.
So just very, very briefly then, perhaps the logical extension from that is that evergreens that we have, like hollies and viburnum tinus and all of those ones, which are shrubs rather than trees,
yeah,
would be more effective, perhaps, or as an alternative.
Possibly, but I'm honestly not the
No.
I can't give you a definitive answer on that. And
No.
I guess that's part of what the research on our site is about, is actually to measure growth rates and so on. But I mean, the point is just get planting one way or another, whether it's virtual or actual in your back garden or whatever. Just, you know, we just need this along with, you know, I mean, what I would say is that there are other ways that we need to stop the deforestation. And there are 2 very clear ways that we can indirectly help stop deforestation. One is with our food, because remember, all that cheap chicken and cheap pork and cheap fish that we're eating is soya fed. And that soya comes mainly from South America. It's coming mainly from the Amazon area. And that is the main reason for increased deforestation. And if you've seen the figures for the increase in deforestation the last few years in the Amazon, it's horrific. So, you know, again, it's just a case of not buying the cheapest meat, you know, and the fact that we're now feeding grain to fish with their antibiotics, you know, should make us all weep, really. The other way that we can stop deforestation happening at the rate it's happening now is, again, to protest about biomass being considered a renewable. We are burning, I think now in the UK, about 6 to 8% of our energy comes from burning wood pellets that are brought in mainly from North America. Now, if you look on Biofuel Watch or on the Dogwood Alliance, you can see, please watch the film Burned. If you know, it might be a good yak wag event. It's a half-hour film and it's really shocking to show how we in Europe, and the UK is the leader in this, are responsible for the clear felling of ancient forest in the Carolinas and elsewhere in the US, to be pelletized and brought to us so we can burn it in power stations as a substitute for coal, and then claim it's absolutely zero emission. That's why our government is, one of the reasons our government is claiming that we've cut our greenhouse gases so much, because they're simply not counting the emissions from this. Now, wood is a precursor to coal. You know, this doesn't make sense at all, and it's responsible for a huge amount of air pollution. So you know, you know, again, protest, you know, get signing those petitions, get talking to your MPs and so on about it. You know, we should not be burning wood to produce electricity on that scale. There was another question over here. Was it Steve, I think?
Yes. Yes, thank you, Nikki. I was pleased to, I've got a couple of points on trees, but before that, because I'm not really a tree person, I've dealt with most of my life with the engineering side of energy use, saving, not using energy.
Good, good.
I am all too familiar, unfortunately, because it is weighed heavily on me with the figures you gave. First of all, I'm a member of Extinction Rebellion, a timid member, I might say, because I don't really fancy being arrested, but I very much support those who are willing to protest properly against HS2 and everything else, and government greenwash, which you're talking about yourself. And I do commend anybody, even if all you can do for an organisation like Extinction Rebellion is pay them some money, do that. I do what I can, and so there we go. Now on trees, two things. Firstly, it's a bit daunting seeing what you're doing with your group, because you know, we haven't got a group like that right on the spot to join, and or have we? Perhaps somebody can say we have. But something else occurs to me, and that is that if everybody, 60 million people in Britain, in the United Kingdom, if every person planted one tree, I've seen other people have said this, of course, that's 60 million trees. That's an awful lot, just one tree per person. Is there some mileage in trying to encourage, I mean, even the smallest houses, gardens, have room for a tree, often enough from my observation of going past them. You can generally get more trees just into ordinary little gardens, if people are willing to do it. And is there a margin for discussion there? All of us here could be planting just one tree, even if we only have a tiny patch. Over to you.
Well, no, I think that's a really good idea. I mean, I'm sure I think you need to choose, in an urban area, you do need to choose your tree carefully, of course, so that you don't end up, you know, it doesn't end up being felled in 15, 20 years because it's cutting out all the light and it's undermining the foundation. So, you know, just take advice depending on how big the garden is that you've got. But no, absolutely, plant trees where you can. And if you can't plant trees, plant scrub, you know, plant shrubs and so on. Yes, I mean, I think, as I said earlier, I mean, there are so many ways to support this effort. Basically the world, we're offered trees over the last year, or we've had so many offers of free trees. Trees are not the expense for us, it's land that is the expense, access to land. And you're absolutely right, if people have got gardens that can take trees, then please plant, you know, because you've got a very valuable resource there. So yeah, I mean, what I would say is, sitting here in Bristol, I don't know where you are, Steve, but you know, we have organisations like one tree per child and so on, and they are running to fulfil council objectives of increased canopy in Bristol. The trouble is, I'm sure they're doing a good job in many ways, but what I see locally is whips put in with absolutely no care. The 700 trees on my local meadow would have died last year if I hadn't got a whole bunch of volunteers out with watering cans and someone to supply water, because the council certainly wasn't watering them. They were choked with weeds by April and they were heavily into drought. They would have all died. And I think that's happened across the city widely. And now the cheapest plastic guards that they put on them are all within a year, less than a year of having been planted, are all breaking down. There's plastic flying everywhere. So, you know, there's planting trees and there's planting trees, but I agree, you know, urban trees are absolutely essential as well as trees out in the countryside. There was, yes, Colin.
Thank you. Yeah, great. Seeing that first slide and the lack of forest and woodland in Avon was quite scary, to be honest. One of the big problems I always think is, of course, the price of land. You know, development around Yatton here is huge, and it's pushed up the even fairly useless land for development. But it pushes up so much that charities like yours, charities like ours, just can't afford it. Some bit you said earlier was that you actually get companies come to you to try and offset their own carbon by you planting trees for them. Is there scope for a scheme where you actually get these companies to develop some land, decide to donate some land rather than you planting trees on your land? You know, you say, well, we'll provide the trees, maybe we'll help you, but you give us half an acre of a corner of your site or whatever, you know.
It's possible, yeah. I mean, first of all, what we have done is sort of translate the tree thing into land. So we work on the basis of 4 square meters needed for a tree, and we work out that we need £2.50 per square meter. So that's £10. So when people say they want to pay for trees, we say, well, work it out as buying, you know, £10 will buy you a tree, but what it's actually helping us buy is 10 square meters. But yet working with companies that actually have land, we were approached last year by an engineering company that wanted, and we'd certainly be interested in considering this, a very, very long-term lease. Our strapline is we want to plant new permanent woodland. So we don't particularly want to plant on somebody else's land and have no security that those trees will be there in 20 or 30 years. Our point is, when we take funder money, we want to know that the trees will be there in the decades and centuries to come. So if a company can come to us and give us that guarantee, we're certainly willing to join with them.
Okay, that's great, thank you.
Yeah. Mike. Oh, sorry, Mike and then Julie, yeah. Mike, you're on mute.
Right.
Yeah.
On that particular point, many of you will know that the basic payment that the farmers receive at the present time is being phased out by something called ELMS, which is the Environmental Land Management. And that's coming in 2023. So there will be, I'm sure, a vast amount of acreage that farmers will need to plant into trees or some other means by watercourses and things of that order. I wonder if that's an opportunity, theoretically, if they lose the basic payment, which at the moment is about £98 an acre, it's going to be a substantial loss, which they can offset by, you know, entering into an ELMS agreement, and that might that could potentially amount to many thousands of acres across the area. But like you say, you know, will they take the money and run and then not look after the trees?
Yeah, or you know, the land gets sold further down the line, or inherited by another member of the family. Do they keep the trees? I mean, that's what you don't have a guarantee for. What I have heard anecdotally, I don't have evidence of this, is that a lot of farmers at the moment are holding off on tree planting because they're actually waiting for 2023, 24 so that they get paid for tree planting. So it's actually making them more reluctant to do it at the moment.
That is absolutely right, yes.
Yeah.
Just on a secondary point, actually.
Yeah.
You in your earlier part, you mentioned about lifestyle. We're confronted, I think, with a multitude of information about how we can do what we should do. Are there any simple things? I'm not particularly into apps, but a great many people are. I mean, are there any simple procedures where, you know, more meaningfully we could sort of say, well, if I don't drive to Bristol today, I will save X number of, you know, ounces of carbon?
Yeah.
Or is there any
carbon calculators and so on? I'm sure there are. I don't know. I'm sure. I mean, if you just Google or whatever, Ecosia, which is a better tree planting search engine, carbon calculators, I'm sure you'll come up with a range, and then I think it's a case of finding the one for you. Yes, I must admit, I know of them, but I haven't used them myself. I'm like you, not an app person. But I'm sure that they're out there. I'm sure that they've been developed, and I'm sure if you're keen on that.
You know, I think I'm absolutely 100% convinced that it is lifestyle. I mean, lifestyle's what it's all about, isn't it, really?
Yeah,
I mean, unless we change our habits and the convenience of, as you've said, you know, cheap food, plus the fact of cheap travel and all of these issues, I think we will continue to pollute the atmosphere. It's just interesting, actually, hearing you. Part of my little job, I have to I have to measure the parts per million in carbon dioxide, and I had 2 occasions to measure things this week. Actually, one was in Clavering, and believe it or not, it was 600 parts per million
of carbon dioxide.
And I also had to go to Portishead, and that was only 450 parts per million.
Only 450. Wow.
Yeah, but very often the danger, the critical number that where people start falling asleep is 1,500.
My God.
But we are particularly, you know, those sort of numbers are very high, actually.
Yes. Well, I mean, if anybody looks at CO2 Earth, they can follow the Keeling curve, and they put out daily statement of the sort of the global calculations, and they're based at Mauna Loa, which is a laboratory out in Hawaii, I think. But I mean, they would calculate that the world got to about 415 parts per million.
Yeah, and I was
on average.
I as I say, I was surprised that the 2 readings that I had to take this week both were above that.
That's extraordinary. To 600. I mean, 450. They're saying, you know, basically that's when we lose control of our climate, and we're adding 2 to 3 parts per million per year at the moment. That is what we.
Perhaps I was looking for rats in cavity walls, actually, so it may have affected my breathing.
Okay. Julie, I think you wanted to ask something.
Rats should stay outside, shouldn't they? Yeah, so my question was about woodland management. So I'm a subscriber to the Land magazine, which is run by the community, you know, written by members of the community at Monkton Wild, who are very into sort of sustainable agriculture and back to the land, sort of all that sort of stuff, and various green enterprises. The Land magazine is always very sort of wittily written, and they always agree with themselves, and I usually agree with them too. But the issue this time was more about, they sort of honed in on woodland management and looking at woodland management versus leaving woods to just fend for themselves and decay. And so their sort of argument was, I haven't got the magazine in front of me, but was about, you know, you're cutting trees down, but replacing trees on a continuous cycle. So that you know, you didn't have you didn't just clear. I'm not talking about clear cutting.
No,
I'm talking about like in Canada and stuff. It's how I've been through clear cuts in Canada and travelled all day long and not seen any trees stand. I mean, it's just really horrendous. So you know, I think the Canadians have got a lot to say themselves, really, ought to. So I've always I grow a lot of willow. I use it as a sort of a shelter, and it's good for wildlife and all that. And so I coppice it and pollard stuff to keep sheet out of my vegetable patch, and coppice other stuff to make really terrible baskets and, you know, various things. Well, you try, don't you? And fencing and stuff like that. But so I've always thought that doing that, you know, I mean, I'm looking at willow trees that I've just let go and they're big, and I'm looking at willows that I've coppiced, and I can't, you know, you get a huge amount of wood that way continuously, and it's very, very useful and all that. But I don't know, maybe I should just leave it to grow, or maybe I don't know whether it extends the life of the trees. But I wonder what you're going to do in your woodland. Are you going to manage the wood? Are you going to use it for something? Or are you going
right, so we have at Hazeland, we've got the 10 acres of ancient woodland there, and then obviously there's the new woodland that we're planting and rewilding. So the management will be different. But for the ancient woodland, we're just looking at this now at the moment. We've only had the site since August, so our focus has been very much on site safety, first of all, to get the public on, and then to get those trees in the ground and to get those new areas sorted and to get our biodiversity surveys underway. But we're now turning our attention to the ancient woodland. And of course, the trouble is, as far as I understand, and I'm not going to claim to be the expert on this, I have to get other people in with their expertise to advise us on this, because it's not my natural area. I've had to learn a lot. But but of course, because we don't have our top predators, we don't have, you know, oryx and God knows what lumbering around our woodlands and so on, and managing them in the ways that would have happened. And of course that they're reintroducing at the Nepis state and so on. But the so it seems that if we want to keep a healthy, long living woodland, we have to intervene a little bit. This is what I understand. The Woodland Trust have looked at our woodland and said it's got a real shortage of understory. We've got too much canopy and not enough light getting into the lower areas. And when we had our dormouse survey, for example, that was one of the things they picked up on immediately. She said, you won't have dormice here because you don't have that understory. And you know, so the idea is that yes, we've got parts of our ancient woodland which are minimum intervention, and then other parts which we now put onto a long coppice rotation, so a 12-year rotation. So this year is the first year that we're going to be coppicing one section, then we'll go on to the next section the next year, and then the next section, and so on, and allow the wildlife to move between the different sections, but just allow that regrowth. Apparently that's what we're being advised to do by ecologists and woodland management specialists. So, but I'll be very interested in seeing that article that you've got. So you know, if you can send it over, do. But, yeah.
Thanks.
I don't know if there are any other questions. Tony, you're on mute.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, sorry, carry. I was just going to say, are there any more questions? So carry on.
Oh, I think there's one here from John. Oh, I just recognised you. Sorry. Hello, John and Doreen, who've been doing our fungi surveys. Sorry, I didn't realise you were there.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're on mute, John. You're still on mute.
Ah.
There you go.
Oh, nice to see you. Nice to see
Yeah.
John too. Met them once. Tony, sorry. I only to be a bit sort of. The question really comes from the devastation that ash dieback is causing.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, before we were trapped in our house, we went down to the Quantocks, for example, in sort of September, October, and the number of ash dieback trees that were dead. How many trees are going to have to be planted simply to replace the ash?
Yeah.
There will be no ash in the southwest in 2 years' time, or no ash, no big ash trees.
No living ash. No, I know.
I mean, there may be some resistant seedlings, but there won't be any. There'll be so few real big ash trees, and the same in
Hazeland, yeah. I mean, well, I think the estimate is that about a third of our trees in the UK are ash. So yes,
Yeah.
boy, are we running to catch up, you know, literally just to replace what we're losing.
That's
So,
right.
yes.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. And on our Hazeland, we also have Phytophthora. We've just had to take down some alder trees that were very close to a pathway that were diseased with Phytophthora. So, yeah, and I'm hearing about other tree diseases, sudden oak death and others. You know, these are all imported tree diseases. Yeah. So, yeah. Colin, did you want to? Oh,
yeah, it was on that subject actually, because I actually run a sort of small gardening landscaping company myself, and we've just recently managed to source some elms which are resistant of the Dutch elm disease, and we've planted them in a project we were doing. And I just wondered if you'd actually managed to source any of those elms and whether you included them in the planting.
I don't think we have included elms in the planting. I don't, you know, as I say, these all came from the Woodland Trust, so we've been slightly beholden to them. But no, that's very interesting to hear that they're out there. And yes, one of the things we've been told is basically don't rush to take down the ash that we have, because the research is still very early. We don't know. Some of them may be resistant, and some of them may, you know, they fail at different rates. So, you know, taking them all down, as many national parks and so on and National Trust I think are doing, they may be taking it down too fast and unnecessarily in some cases, is what we're being told. I think Richard wanted to say something.
Can we make that the final question, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah. On the ash dieback, when you started, one of your slides had something about 26% of the carbon stored in the tree was below ground. So I assume if an ash dies and if it was either cut off or it falls over, if the roots stay in, I assume that carbon still stays there. But also, if the ash comes down, whether it's cut down or falls down, if it's allowed to decay where it is, how much of that carbon goes down into the soil and how much of it, of the decomposition, comes back out into the air?
I don't know that I can answer that question, but but I'm sure you're right. And sorry, I think maybe somebody else can answer that question. John can, yeah?
All of it.
Oh, please, go ahead, go ahead.
When a tree rots, most of it is turned into carbon dioxide.
Okay, so a gloomy answer, yeah.
Well, can I just add a joinder to that? Biochar, which seems to be one of the new things, and I think Kiss the Ground is all about making the soil healthy. Biochar is a wonder product, which is basically charcoal but slightly different. So I suspect if we were to use that, all of that carbon in the dead trees could then be put back into the soil as a sink.
Yeah, in fact, there's a young guy who's actually local to you, called Avon Needs. If anybody wants to be put in touch, ask me. And he's just set up a business to turn felled ash in particular into biochar. And he's got a portable kiln. And the plan is, he's going to do it with the alder that we've just had to take down with Phytophthora. He can only work with the smaller, the brash, things that are less than 3 inches thick. So the big stuff we'll leave as habitat, but the smaller stuff we just need it to dry out a little bit, and then he's going to bring his kiln on site and turn that into biochar for us. But yeah, so there is that option.
Julie.
I just want to say I've tried making biochar and it's quite straightforward, and I've made it and added it into one of my vegetable beds, but I haven't got like you know, because it's all in a rotational system, I can't really sort of compare it like scientifically with you know, one that's been treated the same except it hasn't got biochar in it. But it's very interesting, and I think we need some more actual scientific, you know, studies into biochar, and whether I can see that obviously it sequesters carbon, that's clear, isn't it? But whether it's actually is good for drainage, etc., would be useful to know, wouldn't it? Because some people only do something if it's got a benefit to them rather than just to get green credentials, unfortunately.
And the other thing we really need to know is, because you have to heat to a very, very high temperature. So, you know, as with everything, when you're talking about global warming and greenhouse gases, you need to know the full life cycle analysis. And that's what's you know, difficult to get on everything.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
that's brilliant. Well, I think it's time to let you have a bit of a rest now, Nikki, because you've been going at it for quite some time there. We're really grateful for you coming and leading a really good discussion. So many so many things I would like to ask about, but I think first of all, can we just give a round of applause to Nikki coming on?
Oh, I even heard some of that. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, do keep up the good work. It's great because I think one of the things, having spoken to you, is how important it is to encourage one another. You know, you're going bravely out there where no one's been before, just as we did many years ago. And we're revisiting things ourselves. People do want us to buy more land. As said, it's very difficult at the moment, but we have got a wonderful opportunity. The council hopefully has given us 7 acres of land.
Oh, wow.
In Congsbury for back mitigation, and that is going to be a good opportunity. There's already a lot of hedge plants have gone in. There's some. It hasn't gone very smoothly, but there are options there for us certainly to put in a lot more trees and shrubs and things, and that will be very exciting, actually making small fields. So that's something we're looking forward to. But it's great to have you, and it'd be good to keep in touch with you, and I think together we can perhaps encourage others to do what we're doing, and also get some of these very important messages across. And we thank you very much for that. Thank you everybody for coming along too. Does anybody want need any more? Oh, I ought to remind, before people disappear, here we have the I'm sure I could read it out actually. It makes me much easier. So we've got Chris Sperring on the 4th of March, talking about the impact of climate change on wildlife. And we've got Sarah Dale coming on the 25th of March, talking about planning for biodiversity. And I just wait one comment. I think a lot of the things that are being said, local authorities have got a lot of work to do to try and make new development a little bit more biodiversity free. And I think the comments were made about planting trees and shrubs. They've really gone backwards on this one. And I think that's somewhere where if we can do something, we can do it in our own back gardens. So wildlife gardening is something we're trying to encourage people to do more of. Thank you very much. And well, we'll be in touch.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
you all.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye all, and stay safe, and we'll see you at the next talk. Thank you very much.